Perfect. Okay. So before we start today, I just would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So if you're just joining, we're going to be talking about your NDIS plan, breaking it down, understanding what's in it and how you can use it. Really knowing what the funding categories and everything are. So I'm sort of starting from the point of if you've got a new plan, but if you've had your plan for a few years and you still feel like it's still confusing, because that is understandable, then this is still the point to link in and listen. But if you've just received your new plan or you're about to receive a new plan in the mail and you open it, it can look super confusing and make very little sense. The funding categories don't often say what they are for. And so tonight we're going to break down the NDIS plan and go through each of the categories and help explain it properly. So the first thing is, well, where do you find your NDIS plan? So it tends to be during the planning meeting with the LAC, so the local area coordinator, or the early childhood coordinator or the planner. They would have asked you how you would like to receive the plan. It's generally via post or email. And then also you can get, if you've linked your MyGov with the NDIS portal, you can also get a notification. So you can also access it through through your participant portal. If anyone would like to know how to link their NDIS portal with their MyGov, you can send me an email after, and I'm happy to help, but you can find the details on the NDIS website as well. So we are going to go through in a lot more detail, but essentially what's included in an NDIS plan, it really should be based on the planning conversation that you've had with the LAC, planner or early childhood coordinator. And that doesn't matter whether it's a first plan or a reassessment or a plan variation. You've got that opportunity to speak about what you would like in that plan, and it should be reflective in it. So number one, information about you. So that's in the About Me section. And then you've got your informal, mainstream and community supports. This is not your, so the information about you or the About Me section, that is just talking about your day-to-day life, who you live with and what's important to you. It tends to not be focused on anything to do with your funded supports. So you can say that you go to therapy or that you go to day program or that you go to work program, but they'll try and avoid using specific provider names. The only reason is that that can change quite a lot. Then you'll have the informal, mainstream and community supports. These are not funded supports. So if you do find that you look at it and you're like, yeah, but my therapists aren't there and I want them in there because they're important to me, it's just because they tend to be the ones that are NDIS funded supports. So they won't be included there. And then you've got your goals, and it's really important to ensure that when you're in the planning meeting or prior to the planning meeting, that you spend a little bit of time focusing on what you want your goals to be. And so the goals will essentially be reflected in here. And your goals are really important because the funding that you receive, essentially the main thing with the funding is that it helps you to achieve your goals. So it's a capacity building scheme. And so you want to have goals that reflect what you want to work towards in the next plan period. And then you've got a breakdown of the funded supports in the funding categories. So you've got core first, then you've got capacity building, and then you've got capital. Not all funding categories are not everyone gets funding in each category, but most of the time, I'm not saying all of the time, but most of the time there's funding in core and capacity building, and there most definitely should always be funding in capacity building because it's a capacity building scheme. So how is that, and we're going to go into what each of these categories mean in just a second in heaps more detail. You'll be sick of me saying these words. So essentially, how is the funding structured? There's 3 support categories, which we just said: core, capacity building, and capital. And then there is a number of subcategories. So we're going to go into the subcategories in a second, but if you just think about the whole category first to start with, and then we'll break it down further. Think of core as being for your daily activities, so including your support workers, day programs, low cost assistive technology and consumable items, and your transport. This core also includes supported independent living. So I'm just going to admit these people. So core includes, if you have supported independent living funding, then it will be sitting in your core budget as well. Same as any short-term accommodation or medium-term accommodation funding, that will be found in your core budget. So think of it as your daily activities. And then you've got your capacity building budget, which is the next big, overarching main budget. And this is being a budget for therapy, and for capacity building supports and programs. There's heaps and heaps of subcategories in capacity building, but they're never all used in someone's plan. What I also want to say, which we'll talk about in a bit as well, but in the new price guide that came out on July 1st, there's a bit of talk that this is going to change back, but for right now, it's what exists. There are the capacity building item codes or line items you'll hear people say. So that is the, so say psychology is a line item, and then the price of it. There's actually the line items are also found in the core budget. So there is even more flexibility at the moment between your capacity building and your core, which didn't used to be the case. They're talking about taking that away, but for right now, there is even more flexibility within the core and capacity building budgets, but we'll go into that in a bit more detail soon. And then the last budget is your capital budget. And that's where your mid and high cost assistive technology items are generally found, as well as funding for home modifications and car modifications. And it's not written there, but it also includes specialist disability accommodation. So that will be found in capital. So not everyone gets funding in all categories and subcategories. The funding is determined based on recommendations made by providers and delegates approving that they have found it meets legislation, mainly Section 34, or as we all know it, reasonable and necessary, which we spoke about last month a lot. And we actually have next year, we're going to be doing a session on clinical reports and sort of how to enhance them to help you to get what you need out of a plan or what your person needs out of a plan. But essentially this here really shows why it's so important that the providers, where they're putting their recommendations, number one, that it aligns with your requests, but number two, they've really linked it back to reasonable and necessary. So they do play a really important role in supporting you or your person to get the funding that you need to achieve your goals. So we're going to, hopefully that. So now we're going to go break it down even further, and we're going to look at each of the subcategories. So We have in core, we have the subcategories of assistance with daily life in the portal. So if you're self-managed, then you'll be entering the invoices to get the funding so you can pay the providers through the My Place portal. And the name of the subcategories are slightly different. And so this is what this table shows. So in your plan, it will be assistance with daily life. In the My Place portal, it will say daily activities. And this is, like it says in this table, assistance with your everyday needs, household cleaning and yard maintenance. So it's support, but it tends to be, it's support in the home. So it SIL supports, so supported independent living will come out of here. Short-term accommodation will come out of here. Any support in the home with self-care tasks, transfers, things like that will come out of assistance with daily life. However, just so you know, apart from transport, and I'll talk, there's an exception with transport, which I'll talk about in a second, but apart from transport, in generally speaking, assistance with daily life, consumables, and assistance with social community participation are completely flexible. So you may have a certain amount built in. So you may say have 20,000 built into daily activities, but you might look at it and go, I'm not going to use that much, but I need more in assistance with social community participation. You can absolutely take from one category to the other. So the daily activities is the support in the home. And just to break it down, just to explain why there are the subcategories and why it is like that. When a local area coordinator or a delegate or a planner or an early childhood coordinator, whoever's doing your meeting and building your plan, when they are gathering the information and then they are building the plan, they need to build in the line items and the cost and the hours, and then they need to provide a clear justification as to why they feel it is reasonable and necessary. And that's where they can draw from the reports and from your information that you give at the meetings to explain to the delegate or the person that's actually pressing approve on the plan. They will explain to them why this amount of hours is reasonable and necessary. But then, because NDIS talk a lot about choice and control, they have kept this very flexible. So even though it's built in a certain way, so when you get your plan, and on the left-hand side of the plan, it can sometimes say a blurb, and sometimes it's really generic. And sometimes it will have a blurb that will say this amount for daily activities, this amount for consumables, this amount for social civic participation. That's just taken from what they've built in. However, you don't need to use it like that. So you can use it flexibly. So because you might not, you might have a support worker that comes into your home and they might be in your home for a couple of hours and then they might be out in the community for a couple of hours. So you can absolutely 100% use it flexibly. The next budget is your consumables, and it's the same in the My Place portal and in your plan. And that's for low cost assistive technology. So low cost assistive technology is your off the shelf, under $1,500, low risk and low cost, which is considered anything under $1,500 items. And they're usually, your OT or your physio or someone in your support of a support provider may recommend a certain item. It tends to be something that's doesn't require any modifications. And so it tends to be something that you can just pick off the shelf. Not always, but sometimes. And then it also can include continence products or health related consumable items if you're if you're needing that, or if your person's needing that. So that's what that budget is. And then there is assistance with social and community participation. And in the My Place portal, it is social, community and civic participation. And that's essentially for your support in the community. So it can be for programs, but it can also for social programs, or, you know, day programs, but it can also be for us one-on-one support in the community. And again, yeah, it can be daily activities, consumables, social, community participation can all be flexible. Transport is the exception. So transport is different to the so if a support worker is taking you out in the community, then that, and they charge for the transport, like they charge for the travel cost, that's different to the transport funding. Transport funding, there's the level 1, 2, and 3. And it is, you'll often find, and I just want to make a note here, that you'll often find that local area coordinators or planners will say, yes, this money will be put into, like, will be put into your bank account periodically every fortnight. You don't have to do that. You can actually say, no, I would like it to be self-managed, or no, I would like it to be plan managed. So just know that you have the choice there, because they'll often kind of default to saying it will be in your bank account. It's seen as a contribution to Ubers or taxis, or the transport to and from day programs, or to and from work, or to and from appointments for people who cannot drive now, or cannot drive or cannot travel independently in the community. If you don't have it periodically paid, technically it then falls into this whole core budget, and it becomes flexible. So you can actually use more than what they have allocated on transport. So it becomes more flexible, but you also can get an increased amount of transport money than the level 1, 2, and 3 if you don't have it periodically paid into your bank account. But it is your choice. They don't audit the periodic payments, so you don't need to keep receipts or anything like that for that. So I think definitely know that you can have that option, and it does increase that flexibility, which is good, and not often you're not often told that. So like I said before, the capacity building subcategories, there's so many, but they're not always used. So the first one, support coordination. Support coordination is getting funded less and less, because the LACs, or the local area coordinators, have been given as part of their tender that they win, or, you know, get chosen for as a partner in the community to the NDIA. They have a whole lot of KPIs that they need to adhere to. And they have had a stronger push recently of providing that check-in support. And so they have never been really great at it, because they've just been too busy with everything else. But we're finding that they are falling back on that a lot more now in planning meetings. And unless you have a really, really strong reason or justification, and we can talk about that at another time, to justify support coordination, it's not always included anymore. So the support coordination amount is, and we're going to go into this in a minute, but it is a stated amount. It can only be used for support coordination, or what you'll also find in the support coordination budget is if you have a psychosocial recovery coaching in there. You can't ask for psychosocial recovery coaching unless you've met access for a psychosocial disability, but it is an alternative option to support coordination, similar but different. That's also found under this category. Then you've got the improved living arrangement. So CB home living is what it is in the My Place portal. It's not often funded. And so, but for someone that it is relevant for, it can help you to find and maintain an appropriate place to live. So whether that is a NDIS funded option, like housing option, or whether it's a mainstream funded housing option, it is support to help you to do that. Increase social community participation. In the My Place portal, it's CB social community and civic participation. Now, if you're self-managed and you have funding in core and funding in capacity building, and you've got this line item, so when you get the drop down box and you've got to choose, it might be confusing because it might say social community civic participation, and then you might have another one saying this CB. So CB is just the capacity building one. Essentially, don't stress too much if you accidentally pick one and not the other. It's not a big deal. But essentially, this budget is put in. It again isn't funded a whole lot because it creates a little bit less flexibility. So with core budgets, you could go between all of the budgets apart from transport, unless you had that option. Whereas with capacity building, you can't go between as easily apart from CB health and wellbeing and CB daily activities. You can't really go between. So the CB social civic is essentially for development and training to increase your skills and participate in the social community and recreational activities. So it might be for programs like the most common program that's funded in this area is PEERS, the social skills program for people on the spectrum and with other neurodevelopmental conditions, but it can also be for other programs that you might have identified. The next category is finding and keeping a job. So this is where your SLES funding, if you have SLES in your plan, this is where you'll find it. So SLES is school leaver employment support funding. So also, if you have funding in there for an ADE or an Australian Disability Enterprise, that will also be found in here. And you'll know it, and it is specific to that. So again, it will be a stated amount. CB relationships or improved relationships is where your behaviour support funding is, if you have that in your plan. And you'll get, like, it'll be in separate boxes on your still under the support, capacity building, but in separate little boxes. So you'll know that you have behaviour support funding. Again, it is a stated amount and it is only to be used for behaviour support, either training or plan, which you'll have that allocation there. Improved health and wellbeing. This again doesn't get funded a lot anymore, but essentially it is often put in for dietitian and exercise physiology. Some people get personal training funded, and not a common thing to get funded. A lot of people mainly get exercise physiology, but exercise physiology can also be put in CB daily activity. And so it just depends. It's obviously more flexible if it's all in the improved daily living or CB daily activity budget. NDIS, and there's just a point there that NDIS don't fund gym memberships. CB lifelong learning, so that includes training and advice to help you move from school to further education, such as uni or TAFE. Now, this doesn't include any of the supports that uni or TAFE fund, but this is more disability specific training or mentor support that can help you with that transition. CB choice and control, or improved life choices, is if you've chosen to be plan managed. This will be a stated amount, so it can only be used for plan management, and it's always NDIA managed, because a plan manager can't pay themselves. So it will, that's essentially added in. does not, so some people think, oh, I don't want to be plan managed because then I won't get it, like that funding could be put somewhere else. Doesn't work like that. So if you make the choice to be plan managed, they will build in the funding for plan management. But if you don't, it makes zero difference to your plan. It just isn't built in. And then the most common budget that is pretty much in every single NDIS plan, or should be in every single NDIS plan, considering it is a capacity building scheme, is your improved daily living, so your therapy budget. So it can be for assessment, not diagnostic assessment, but for assessment. So if it's a functional capacity assessment or if it's a neuropsych assessment, for training or skill building, and therapy. So not treatment, but it's more that capacity building therapy to help to increase skills, independence, and community participation. And it can be group or individual. And then we've got the last category, which I don't know, is your capital. And this is a small one. So we've got, it's not in a lot of plans. It's in people's plans who need the assistive technology. But essentially it's for assistive technology includes not the low cost, it's the mid and high cost. And it also includes the major repairs and maintenance on any equipment. So this, and then it also includes your vehicle modifications. That's also, that funding will also be in here. What you'll find though is sometimes they'll say you'll have an amount that will be not a very high amount, but then on the left hand side you'll have an amount, you'll have a list saying listing the items. So it might say power wheelchair, a bed, like communication device, whatever it is, a list of items, and then it will say in bracket quote required. So essentially what that means is they've acknowledged and built behind the plan the line item in for the wheelchair, but they need a quote to then release that money, and they'll release it to the provider that's provided the quote. And then that can be ordered. So it's a much quicker way of getting something funded than if you don't say anything at the planning meeting and then later on, and sometimes you can't help this, but later on you identify that you need a new wheelchair, for example, and then the OT needs to do an AT report and submit that, and then they have to go through the whole, like a really big approval process. Whereas if it's already built behind the plan, it's a lot quicker because the quote comes in, they're just waiting on that, and then the funding's approved. There has been a little bit of change to the assistive technology, and it's actually a lot easier now to get things approved. I think it's the NDIA's way of pushing through because they had such a backlog of assistive tech approvals. So now they have something called mid-cost AT, and mid-cost AT is anything between 1,500 and 15,000, and that is any item in between there. All you need to get it approved is a quote and a recommendation letter from an OT or a physio. You don't need to do the full report. Anything over 15,000 needs to go for the full report. But it does make it a lot easier now to get things approved. And then the other part of the capital is home modifications. Unless there is a quote that's already been approved, and you will need to get a full report for this, they will generally only build in $1,500 to $3,000. It's typically $3,000, and that is essentially for the builder and the quote to get all of that information to send it all to the NDIA. And then out of your improved daily living budget, that's when the OT will write their report. So that funding comes out of there, doesn't come out of here. So this is just mainly for the builder. If you see that there's like $1,500 and you're like, that's so not enough, that's what it's for. And then if you get specialist disability accommodation funded or SDA, that will be sitting in this budget. So how do you know what parts of your plan are flexible? So like I was saying before, core supports is the most flexible budget. And you can move the funding from one category to another category. Whereas you're unable to do that as much in capacity building or capital budgets, not at all in capital really. And in capacity building, it's limited. So within health and wellbeing and improved daily living, there's a bit of flexibility because you can use physio and exercise physiology and PT out of each. But there isn't as much. It's usually when one has been depleted, then they will take from the other one. Whereas with core, you can go between at any time. Stated supports are not flexible. So if you see that there's something that says stated, and it will clearly say it in brackets next to the budget that's been allocated, that means that it's been allocated for a specific service. So if it's behavior support or support coordination or whatever it is, and it cannot be used for anything else. It has to be used for that, and you can't swap it out. If you've got in-kind supports funded in your plan, which might seem like a weird, what does that mean? It means that the service has already been paid for by the state, territory, or federal government. So that can include disability transport to and from school. That can include a hearing product, you can have in-kind hearing supports. Now that has sort of shifted and changed across time, but if you see in-kind for hearing, that's what it means. Hearing Australia, or it's going to be funded, and it's under 26, it will be funded. And then so you don't need to pay for them. They're already automatically paid, but this is just them acknowledging that it's paid by the state. And then a quote required is what I just explained, and that they're asking for additional information, whether it is a report, like an AT report, whether it's a recommendation letter, either one of those along with the quote. And that needs to get submitted to the NDIA, to inquiries, or to the LAC, or directly to the planner if you're lucky enough to have their email address. And then that can be escalated and submitted that way. So
Alex, might that be just a good moment to feed?
I think that's a great moment to do some questions.
Yeah, there were a couple around flexibility, so they might serve as quite good examples. So earlier on, Randolph has asked if capacity building states the funds can be used for occupational therapy and psychology. Are we limited to only using it for those two services?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So at the end here, I'm going to actually go through a bit of a checklist, but we will also share some resources after. If the service that you're asking for, or that you want to use your capacity building budget for, is reasonable and necessary, then you are not limited to those two services. So that will be what the LAC or the planner found was reasonable and necessary from their perspective. But if you have a different perspective and it meets all of that criteria, which we'll go through at the end, you can definitely use it flexibly for other services. So that's definitely not. You can definitely have flexibility there.
Fantastic. And then Camilla had a question as well. She said, that we didn't request or receive psychotherapy in current NDIS plan, but with the flexibility, can we now add that to core or capacity building if we have the budget?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the psychology, if you're plan managed, they will often want to deplete the capacity building budget before they start using core for capacity building supports. But if you're self-managed, you can go between. But you absolutely have the flexibility to use that core budget for therapy support. So like I was saying in the beginning, they've got the line items in the price guide now. And so if you've got if you have a plan manager that comes back to you and goes, no, there's no flexibility, then you can actually show them the price guide where it actually states that there is the line item. Or you can ask your NDIS support coordinator or support person, Camilla. You can just send it to me and I can help you because I'm working with Camilla's daughter. And so, but there is that flexibility, absolutely. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Fantastic. And then there was just one more question that came in when we were talking about the core funding. So the low cost assistive technology part. Andrew wanted to know what kind of things are covered by that. As an example, his son has difficulty cutting vegetables. So would it cover the cost of a blender? I would definitely recommend, if not already, your son seeing an OT. If they can write a supporting letter for some items, then that is going to be really helpful, because sometimes the plan manager can be a bit like, oh no, we're not funding it. In terms of a blender is typically seen as a everyday, like an everyday item that people can buy. So it's not disability specific. So it's not typically funded. However, I do understand that it is due to your son's disability that he has difficulty with cutting the vegetables, which would mean he needs the blender. So if that can be justified by the OT, then definitely you have a chance. And it is some of those items like that. Sometimes like modified cutlery and things like that can be funded. So it's yes, it's the off-the-shelf items, but it needs to be sort of disability specific and not everyday items, unless the OT can really justify that it is as a result of the disability. I think there's some examples, some other examples, not food related, but it could be sort of shower chairs, sometimes even walkers, the cheaper kind of walker can be funded, cushions and things like that for, to help with pressure sores, stuff like that can be covered through low cost assistive tech. There is a big, obviously everybody through COVID wanted an iPad for telehealth, and that was a big thing that was getting funded a lot through low cost assistive tech, but they're starting to pull back on that now because we're going into a wave again, but they're being a bit stricter now with that. But iPads used to be funded. Sensory items like noise cancelling headphones, things like that can be covered as well. Great, that was all the questions so far. Thank you, Alex.
No worries. So I guess the next bit I wanted to talk about was, how does the way you manage your plan impact the way that you can use it? And I just wanted to point this out because obviously if you've already got your plan, you might go, oh, I can't change it. You can actually change it. So you can actually change it when at any point, you can change from any of these things. And you can partially, so you might choose to self-manage just your core budget, or you might choose to just self-manage your capacity building budget. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be your whole plan. You can do parts. So when you're self-managed, you can see that you have a lot more choice and control over your providers. They don't need to be registered. They still need to be, obviously, if it's a therapist, you want them registered with AHPRA, but they don't need to be registered with the NDIA. So some organizations choose not to be registered because it can be really expensive for them, and might not be worth it because they might have a lot of Medicare clients or whatever. So it doesn't mean that they're a crappy service if they're not a registered provider. It's just their choice. And the provider, so if it's a support worker, they don't have to be registered if they're self-managed, and they don't have to have anything except an ABN. So there's obviously a lot more choice if you have people that you meet and want to work with them. You've got a lot more choice being self or plan managed. And then with the pricing, so for you can always negotiate to be less than the price guide, but for self-managed, you can go less and above the price guide. For plan managed, you can go less, of course, but you cannot go above the price guide. And for NDIA managed, you can go less, but not above. And then for you can obviously view your plan in the portal. It doesn't matter how you manage your plan. And then you obviously have to manage the bookkeeping and records of your spending if you're self-managed, but not if you're plan managed. The plan manager will do it, and not if you're NDIA managed, the NDIA will do it. So essentially, self-managed is you doing it. Plan managed is a third party or an accountant for your NDIS plan doing it. NDIA managed is the invoices going straight to the NDIA and being paid through the NDIA. So there's not as much flexibility with the NDIA. But there's more flexibility when it is plan managed or self-managed. Plan managed is the most common way of managing your plan. But like I said, you can choose to manage, self-manage and plan manage and NDIA manage parts of your plan. You don't have to do your whole plan, and you can change it at any time. So you probably hear a lot about this, and it's service bookings and service agreements. What's the difference and what are they? So a service agreement is essentially a mini contract between you and the provider, to talk about things like the service that's going to be provided, the cost, if there's any cancellation policies, how long the service is for. So if it's for 3 months or 12 months, what it includes, what your responsibilities are, and what the provider's responsibilities are. It is encouraged that you have a service agreement because it keeps everyone on the same page. And it also sort of, if there's something in there that says that they can't up the price, for example, while you have the service agreement in place, then if they did a price hike, then you can go back to that and go, well, actually, this is what we both like, that this is what we signed. So it can help with things like that. But I feel like it really helps to keep people on the same page. So if you've got any concerns, or if they've got any concerns, you can come back to this document. And if you read a service agreement before you sign, and you are unhappy with the cost or anything like that, you've got time to kind of go back and forth and negotiate, make those changes before you sign it. So it is encouraged. You don't have to, it's not mandatory. It is definitely not, something that you have to do if you're working with an NDIS provider, but it is encouraged. And then a service booking is used to set aside funding for an NDIS registered provider for the support that they will deliver. So if you've signed a service agreement and it says that they are going to use, and it says that the OT is going to use $5,000 in this plan, then the service booking will be made for $5,000. It can't be made for more unless you sign it to say that it's going to be more. So sometimes people will say, and you might have come across this might have happened, that you had a like signed the service agreement for $5,000 and then they ran out of that money, and they might come back to you and say, we've run out of our, out of the $5,000. Do you have the funding if we allocated another, $2,000 to this service booking? And then you need to sign another agreement for them to do that, and then they will do another service booking. So it can be helpful to have that. If you change providers, all you need to do is email the provider and ask them to release the service booking, and they can do that within, it doesn't take them very long, like 10 minutes or less. And so that they are able to do that, and you are able to change providers even if you've got a service booking with another one. So just know that it doesn't lock you in, it just quarantines the money so that they guarantee that it's going to be there when they need it, because they can only bill after a service. They can't bill, for the whole lot at once. And if people are doing that, it's wrong, completely wrong, and they should not be doing it. So what can you spend your money on? So if you have, like one of the questions before, if you've got information on the left-hand side of your plan in those little blurbs that say, this funding is for occupational therapy and psychology, but you want to spend it on speech, how you kind of go, okay, it's okay for me to do that, is by going through and making sure that it's reasonable and necessary. This is essentially a little checklist to sort of say, is it linked to my goals? Is it reasonably priced and best value for money? Is the support approved within your NDIS budget? So is the amount going to last? Will it help you to build your independence? In the NDIA are really focused on job and education and community participation. So, but that might not be something that is relevant to you, but is it going to support you to build your independence to at least accessing the community? Oops. And is it needs to be something that's not funded by other government services. So make sure it's not funded by health or education, public housing or transport, like public transport or disability transport programs. And will it help you to participate in activities? So if you're like ticking yes to these ones, then you can go, okay, I think it is something that is reasonable and necessary for me to fund. Yes, I know that it's going to really help. And yes, I can use my funding flexibly. So you can choose a different therapist, or like a different provider, or a different, a different service to utilize your NDIS plan. So that is essentially me talking. And so we just got, does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to ask? I know I gave a lot of information. This is obviously recorded, and all the resources and everything will be uploaded, as well as a little summary article and the recording on the website. So you can go back to it if you need to. But are there any questions in the chat, Ali?
No further questions in the chat since we did a last roundup. But yeah, obviously at this point, anyone, you can still put them in the chat or jump off mute and ask yourselves whatever you prefer.
Yep, I've got a couple. Andrew here. I've got a couple of questions, if I could.
Of course.
The first one is my son's plan is coming near the end, and he's still got a little bit of extra money left over for various reasons, not a lot. but I want to be able to use that. So it's only like a couple of weeks to go. So does that mean we just have to get the new service agreement done with the provider? Or can they just invoice sort of for the extra?
Yeah, so they so you don't have to do a service agreement. You can just link in with a provider and utilize it. You can also, if he's got core funding, you can also use it for items. It just has to be used up within the plan dates.
Yeah, we're just trying to, it's a bit difficult trying to make sure, know exactly how much he's got left. Because the type of support he gets, it's not always consistent, or people that they're sick, or Michael's sick, or various reasons. It's just not always locked into the supports he gets.
Yeah,
So
no, that's
trying to make sure we use it or get the most out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So you can, so you can get items, like you can get low cost assistive tech items if you've got that budget in the core. But
yeah, this is to do with the cooking. He's getting one-on-one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so to be able to get some extra hours in.
Yeah.
To help him with the independent living.
Yeah. Does he have an OT?
Yes, he's he's got an OT. That was the other thing too, she's recommended psychology services as well. I was putting that off. I've decided he really needs to do that sort of now because it's affecting his ability to do the things he needs to do. So his plan is due to expire in a couple of weeks. Do I have to quickly get in before the plan expires, or won't matter if I go back in a month's time and put something together?
So it won't matter if you go back. Obviously, if you go back in a month's time, you have a new plan. So you can use that new plan for psych. But if you want to get in, there's obviously a lot of wait lists at the moment, but if you want to get in before the plan, just to use it, you could possibly do that. But otherwise, if it's your new plan,
it was to increase the funding. All they're going to do is roll over the existing plan for a year.
They're just going to roll over it.
Yeah, and then it's like, actually, we need to get increased funding for psych.
Yeah, okay. Can you go back to them and say that you actually want to have a plan variation?
Yeah.
And then you can ask for an increase in funding, but you just need the OT's letter of support.
Okay.
So that
Excellent, that's perfect.
Yeah, so if you've got that, but I would ask if they've said that they're going to roll over the plan, you can say at any time, no, I don't want to roll over the plan. I want to do a meeting, and you can do a meeting, and you can say that you need an increase in psych, and then they will say, where's the supporting evidence? And then you provide the OT letter.
Terrific. Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Eric, do you want to ask something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't have a support coordinator and you're in the process of trying to locate one, the fact it's advantage you in the long run, or because of what you've been consistently, the fact it advantage you in the next plan.
Is there a disadvantage to you using and not having used the support coordination funding because you're not using it at the moment for your next plan?
There are pros in there, but I'm trying to get a new course.
You're trying to get a new course?
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat what he said, Alex?
Yes, please, Soph.
No way. So he's saying that because he's in the process of getting a new coordinator, and obviously he's not using the support coordination funding at the moment, so there's a bit left over now when he gets to the end of the plan, because obviously he's not using it now. So he just wants to know, does that disadvantage him at the end of the plan if there's support coordination funding left over? Is that what you got?
No, it should be fine, Eric. It's often the support coordinator doesn't utilize all of their plan, all of the funding in the plan anyway. So as long as their funding has been used, plus you can just tell them, you can just say that I had to cease with my support coordinator because it wasn't working, and then I had trouble finding someone else. So you can just tell them, okay? But it won't disadvantage you. It will be okay. Yeah, that's okay. Well, thank you everyone. It's been really good. It went very
Could
quickly.
I just ask one more question? If that's all right. It's an indirect question because to get the funding, I need to go through the GP, and the GP that we use is not really that au fait with a lot of the NDIS. So I'd like to be able to find a GP that is really good in the Northern Beaches, ideally close to French's Forest. How do we go about finding a good GP that's very familiar with NDIA and also clients with a disability?
It's tricky. So, and a lot of GPs will it can be a bit tricky to find someone who's willing to tackle the NDIS. But if you don't have a support coordinator, you can send an email. I can put the email address in the chat, but you can send an email to the support coordination team, and it can be, you can address it to me, and it can be sent to me. I can send you a couple of names that I kind of know I've worked with on the Northern Beaches, but otherwise, I'm happy to talk to any GP about NDIS language and how to, because they're very good at medical language, of course, but we really need it to be that functional language and really linking to that. So I'm more than happy to help with speaking to any GP, but in terms of a GP that is good with the NDIS.
Yes,
hard
I
to
think there's a
know.
Facebook page or something out there where people, they all talk.
Yeah,
and you might go and put that question out. They go, I know.
Yeah, does anyone else know? Is there any Facebook page or anything like that that people feel like that they could ask something like that? Or does anyone have a good GP that they on the Northern Beaches? That's good with the NDIA.
I'm not in the area. I'm in Brisbane. I would recommend looking for any just your local community group Facebook pages, because I know like in our group, often things regarding disabilities just generally will come up. So if you just ask, can anybody recommend a doctor that is au fait with NDIS in the area? Something like that. Alternatively, and this is what we did with our GP, is I actually wrote out a whole letter as if it was him, and I gave it to our GP, explained it all. He went over the letter, and then he just, he just took the facts. He trusted that we knew the deal, and our child's been on the NDIS since it first rolled out in Brisbane. And so he made his letter scaffolded by what I had already given him, and that worked really well, and he was happy with that, and we were happy with it. So yeah,
you can also do that. Yeah, you can also have them, and then they'll put their letterhead on it, and then they'll sign it.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
That's okay. I just sent you that email address as well. So if there's any other questions or anything like that, then you can flick them through. Next month, I am going to do a Q&A. So you can send questions through prior. It can be any NDIS related question. It's just sort of to wrap up the year. We weren't going to do an education session, and then we sort of thought about this as an idea. So any questions that you want, you can send them through before, or you can just come on the night and have ad hoc questions. There'll be time for both, and I will do my best to answer the questions on the night, but if I don't, then I'll take them down, and then I'll contact afterwards with the response. So that is in December, and then in January we're going to do a I'm just going to tell you the dates. So December 6th of December, we're going to do the Q&A, and then 24th of January, I'm going to do education session on feedback and advocacy. So that in the NDIS space, and because it can obviously be quite confusing. And then in February, we're going to be talking about clinical reports and supporting evidence, and there'll be a guest clinician speaking as well. That will either be February or March. We're just trying to toss up which one we're going to do in March and which one we're going to do in February. So either or, those ones are coming up. And if the Q&A goes well, then we'll do that every couple of months. So hopefully that is a good thing for you guys to come and bring your questions. It can be anything really. Do you know if we have an NDIS expert in the Melbourne hub? Just curious if there are any local resources. I'm not sure, Randolph. I don't know any the Melbourne hub very well. That was just the question on there. But if there is any, if there's anyone in Melbourne that knows an NDIS expert, but I'm based in Sydney, except I can help around, obviously in the local area. That's a bit tricky, but if there's anything more general, then I'm happy to help out. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
Before you go, Andrew.
Yeah. Oh,
Can I speak to Andrew for a minute?
Yes.
My son is at a group home in Beacon Hill. They go to the cottage surgery, 347 Condamine Street, Manly Vale, 9948 3768.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Eric.
that was one of the ones I was going to recommend. There's a GP there that's very, very good. And quite well known for being very good in the NDIS space. That's good. Thank you, Eric. Well, thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Alex. That was great.
And yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed that. And I hope that was helpful. And I hope you guys have a nice night. I'll let you go to your dinner. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye, Alex.
Bye.